അവിടുന്ന് മണ്ണിറ മണത്തിൽ എന്നോട് മാനസികമായിട്ടുള്ള
Hey everyone, it's Sam, and welcome back to the 911 Nonsense podcast. To stay in the loop, learn about upcoming guests, and join in the conversations with the Noon community, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And hey, if you like what you hear in this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support means the world to us. Destiny Morris, a licensed marriage and family therapist, joins Noon to share her journey of becoming a culturally competent therapist for first responders. With a background influenced by both personal relationships and professional experience, Destiny dives into the unique challenges faced by first responders, including trauma, addiction, and communication breakdowns in relationships. She explains how EMDR therapy, accessible self-care, and early intervention can transform lives and offers insight into what truly makes therapy work for those who serve. From debunking therapy myths to promoting practical tools, Destiny brings clarity and compassion to the mental health conversation. Let's get started. Hey guys, are you looking for a top-notch first aid kit? Look no further than Jump Medic. Owned by a seasoned paramedic with over a decade of EMS experience, their kits are user-friendly and packed with essential supplies. From the most popular Pro Gen 2 to the compact hardshell kit, they've got you covered. You can even customize your own kit with the Build-A-Bag option. Enter the code NOON10, N-O-O-N, the number 10, and enjoy 10% off your order. Free US shipping, and everything is HSA FSA approved. Visit jumpmedic.com and follow at jumpmedicusa on Instagram. Stay prepared with Jump Medic. All right, Destiny, thank you so much for joining us on the Noon podcast today. I'm so excited to have you here. We talk a lot about mental health and therapists for first responders, and I finally got somebody who is a first responder therapist, so I appreciate you coming out today. Can I go ahead and get an introduction?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I specialize in first responders. I work with individuals, I work with couples, and then I work with the teenagers of first responders as well. I also see non-first responders, but they're more few and far between, as people usually know me or find me because of my specialty with them. I am located in California, and I'm telehealth, so everybody I see is typically, or it is completely over Zoom or the phone.
That's awesome. Telehealth is something that I've talked quite a bit about on the show, and I love that we have that as an outlet, not just for first responders, but for people in general, right? Telehealth has opened up so many opportunities for specialists in the field, for people who wouldn't be able to typically get access to these specialists.
Yes, yeah. That's been the coolest thing is that I can see people who are on, California's pretty big, right? On the far end, the other end of California where they wouldn't typically be able to see me if I was only in person. And it's really created that safe space too, where people can do therapy in their bed or they can do it in their car, or if they're on shift, they can step outside and do it on their lunch break. So it has made it a bit more accessible for people, I believe, as well.
That's awesome. And you had mentioned that you typically see a lot of first responders. Is that, do you get a lot of referrals from other first responders?
I do. Yeah, I'm thankful for that too. Having a private practice, word of mouth is typically one of the biggest ways where we get known or people know who we are. I'd say podcasts is a great one too. A lot of people who will listen to the podcasts that I've been on and then reach out for therapy. But yeah, other first responders, local departments who know who I am. I partner with a couple of EAP systems, but not many. And I work with a few nonprofits specifically for first responders, and I'm on their registry as well if people are looking for a culturally competent therapist.
Okay, and you talk about culturally competent, and why is that important for first responders?
It is the utmost importance. I think that the word is overused, and I know people prefer, what is the other term? Maybe it's not culturally competent. It's like, I can't think of the other term people use, but I think it's extremely important. And I hear horror stories all the time, and I don't know if anybody listening has ever done therapy and had these themselves, but I've heard of first responders who will go see a therapist, a regular therapist, and they will start to talk about the details of what they see or what they do or their schedule. not only are they having to go in and explain what they do, their job, and the culture, which is a huge thing, to someone that is has never been in it, doesn't understand it, but then they're also maybe tiptoeing around the therapist, not sure if they can share certain details. As a first responder therapist, and I make this very known in the first session, you are allowed to come in and dump the grittiest, grossest, gory calls. You're allowed to use dark humor with me. I understand how shift work works. I understand the culture and the dynamic of relationships with first responders. And I think that's extremely important. You can see a therapist outside of that, but you're going to be spending a lot of time explaining yourself. And I feel like that gets in the way of doing the work sometimes.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I know that there's been a couple of times, and I've heard this multiple times from other providers, but like we're afraid to go in and break the therapist, right? Because that's scary. And we just think that everybody should understand where we're coming from and maybe not necessarily understand, but people like we're going to therapy, we're paying for this therapist, so they should be able to handle what we're giving to them and they can't necessarily handle what we're giving to them. So, what do you suggest to people who are looking for therapists to look out for?
Yes, you have to find someone that's culturally competent if you're a first responder. And I'm very passionate about that. And when I say that, it's the most difficult thing is that there are many coaches and therapists who will say that they work with first responders and they don't have anything to back that up. And that is a big bummer. There's a lot of, I find, I mean, with any profession, right? There's people that are good at their job and people that are bad at their job. So that's why those 15-minute consultations that I would say most therapists offer, they're free. Take them, talk to them prior. And then if you even go into a session and it feels funky, try another therapist. That is okay. Sometimes finding a therapist is like thrift store shopping. You have to dig through the funky, weird stuff to get to the good stuff. And I think that's very accurate to finding someone that works with you. So the first thing is finding that first responder therapist, and you can find it. There's many different directories. You can DM me on Instagram, and I'll send you one too. But the Overwatch Collective has vetted all of their culturally competent therapists, and they have most states covered, where you can go on their website and you can click on the bios and read about them. That's an easy way to find a therapist. I'm on there as well. Another one is what is it? Academy Hour has a huge, huge one. This one's a little bit, I would say, less vetted, but more so accessible. You're going to find multiple therapists in every single state on the Academy Hour website. Both of these are linked in my highlights on Instagram. Those are great ways to find them. And then the questions you ask during the consultation are important too. So, asking what's your experience working with first responders should be probably the first question.
So, are there red flags to kind of keep an eye out for?
Yes. So if someone says, "Oh, I don't really have any experience working with first responders," or, I see them sometimes, to me, that's a red flag. I think you need someone that does it day in and day out that understands. And then I would straight up ask the questions. If I come in and I talk about my calls, am I going to traumatize you? That's okay to ask a therapist.
Okay, that's good
If
to
someone
know.
Yeah, we're human, right? If someone asked me that, and usually they don't have to ask because I like to share this in the consultation as well as the first session, is this is the one place a first responder does not need to care for someone else. If you think about it, as a first responder, you're always holding space or being a rock for everyone around you. And that's becomes a part of who you are. You do it in your families, you do it with your friends, you do it with your, you know, coworkers. Everyone's kind of being a rock for each other, holding it together. So therapy needs to be the one place where I'm giving you that permission. Hey, you don't have to wear that hat in here. Leave that outside the door. And you don't have to protect me. Dump it here. And then I always share, and this is why I have an Instagram that's so open and public to my clients, is I make sure that my self-care is so on par that when you dump your stuff with me, I'm able to go dump it too. Right? I go to therapy, I dump my stuff. We can talk about that more in detail if you want, but that's important to find a therapist that is making sure that they're also doing their work.
So, so as a first responder therapist, do you have to go to another first responder therapist to dump your stuff?
Yeah, sometimes. I wouldn't say that it's like oh my gosh, every week I have to go dump this stuff. I'm so used to the stuff that I hear and we talk about that I become a level of desensitized, just like a first responder would. There's
Hmm.
actually a lot of similarities with that. But there are some where I'm thinking about it often, or I'm like, oh, that was a really heavy one. And it's not usually the details of like, car accidents or whatever. It's usually not the gory stuff. For me, it's like I have this really deep emotional connection with my clients, and I love that. And I pride myself in having that with my clients. That is a big part of working with me in therapy is that we feel connected. So with that being said, I have a lot of empathy. And when we're talking about really heavy, deep stuff, or maybe childhood trauma or anything of that nature, sometimes I have a hard time shaking it. And then I will call my therapist, who is also a first responder therapist, and I will say, hey, I need to book a session. And we'll talk about it, air it out, do some EMDR, whatever I got to do. I don't do that often, but it does happen sometimes. I'd say more so. I'm doing my own work, my own childhood trauma, my own relational work in my personal life with my therapist when I need to. And that gives me more space to help my clients because I'm also working on myself. If I'm not willing to go through that work myself, there's no way that I'm going to be able to help my clients go through it as well.
Right. And that's like a big hit, right? That is a huge statement. If you are not willing to put in the work to get through it, how can somebody help you get through it, right?
Yeah, it's hypocritical, right? For me to say, oh, come to therapy, do this deep work, do inner child work and EMDR, the stuff that's really, really hard. It would be very unfair for me to do that and not go into my own inner child work and my own EMDR therapy.
But then for first responders too, right? Like I think a lot of us think that we can just walk in and sit in a room and be perfectly fine. But no, you actually have to put in that work to get yourself better, right? Like you actually physically and mentally have to put in the effort and the work to getting better so that you can get better and that so that you can continue your job, essentially your career that you've chosen this path.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we talk a lot about, I like to use pictures when I speak. So the analogy of like a check engine light in your car, if the check engine light is on, we're just going to drive around ignoring it. Some people do. And then your car is going to what? Explode at some point. Yeah, you. Guilty.
Yeah, I'm guilty.
Don't do that. Typically, when it turns on, that's a sign that tells us we need a little bit of maintenance. Doesn't mean your car is broken. Doesn't mean it's never going to drive again. Doesn't mean, that it's never going to be the same after you go get that oil change. Just means that you need to do the maintenance work to make sure it continues to run well.
Yeah, that's a great analogy for that's a great example. Do you think that so this is something that I hear quite a bit on the show, and that's that people come from chaos, right? Like they've had this chaotic childhood and they had this a lot of these chaotic teenage years, and coming from that, they want to continue to live into this chaos, right? Because that's all they know how to live. Would you agree with that statement for a lot of first responders?
Hmm. I typically try to steer away from like very big blanket statements because everybody's so different and everybody has different experiences. My brain went two directions when you said that. My brain went relationship. Yes, that's a real thing. If you're used to toxic relationships, you might find it very uncomfortable to not be in a toxic relationship. And then I also see where you're going with first responders, where if you grew up in a very toxic household, you might find it to be it's a comfortable thing for you to be able to navigate. Now, let me take this example sideways for a second so we can take it outside of first responders. We see this in a lot of other professions. We are naturally good at things because sometimes of where we come from. So, for some therapists, this isn't me, but for some therapists, they come from households where they did a lot of counseling to their parents or their siblings, or they were the peacemaker. And then they become therapists and they're like, oh, wow, look at, I fit perfectly in my job because it's something I've practiced. Now
Hmm.
we come back to the chaos question with first responders, that it could be very much so a thing. But there are also a lot of first responders who don't come from chaos that also just like to be helpers, or they like to feel productive, or they have the gift of helping. I think that there's a lot of different reasons why. Unfortunately, there's a dark side of that too. I see a lot of narcissistic people, and I see a lot of people who really struggle with empathy and compassion that become first responders because they like the idea of being a first responder. So there's a lot of different sides to that. I can't say it's
I agree. And then you kind of hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of people that say, like, I'm studying I have my FPC, which is the flight paramedic certification. I'm studying to take my critical care EMT paramedic certification, also my CCMTP or my CCTP.
That's awesome. Good job.
And one of the first, like, in the first, like, 3 pages, it talks about how the type of person that gets into this job is typically somebody who wants that adrenaline rush, right? Like, unfortunately, we have to have these kinds of people because we need people to do these jobs. Because if we didn't have these kinds of people, who would be firefighters and police officers and paramedics, EMTs? Like, do you agree with that statement? I felt like that was a very bold statement to put into a book because there's not, while there is some level of adrenaline, it's not adrenaline filled 24/7.
No, it's not. I, I think that those I wonder who writes those books, and it reminds me of the first responder counseling certificate that I got. The course was very much so like that, making huge statements and had dramatic music, and first responders are always looking for this, and I just I don't agree with a lot of blanket statements. I do think that there are some people that really enjoy that adrenaline, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about addiction, and that goes hand in hand with the adrenaline that can happen in being a first responder, or the hypervigilance that's there. Absolutely. But again, I think it could just be one reason why people seek being a first responder. I don't think it's the only reason.
Sure. We just tend to blow it up and make it a big deal. Like the firefighter who's a volunteer firefighter that also goes and lights fires to get those calls, right? Like those are the
Yes.
ones that we're blowing up and making this big, huge deal about. And then everybody assumes that every firefighter goes and lights fires, but they don't. You know?
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody, but I might have seen that. Absolutely. Some people really like adrenaline, and those are the people on their days off when I ask them, "What does your self-care look like?" And they're like, "Driving my motorcycle fast." And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Okay, sounds good."
That's awesome. And so what pushed you to become a first responder therapist specifically?
Yeah, good question. So, I grew up in a household where my dad worked in law enforcement. Now, he was not in law enforcement for a long period of time, so I'm not the typical like child of a first responder. I've shared this in other podcasts. He was only there for a period of time, and when I was in about middle school age. So, I had a snippet of that, what it was like, and then fast forward. I went a lot of different routes. I studied abroad for a few years. I have a bachelor's degree in theology, which is very random, but I wanted to travel. So I went there first, came back, did community college, and went, oh my goodness, I think that I am really interested in psychology. Like, this is something that sounds really cool. So that started my interest in psychology in general. Went to UCSB and then ended up going to grad school right after. In grad school, I was in a relationship with a fireman, and his dad was the DA. So there was a lot of uh, wake up calls for me being the difference between being a daughter of a first responder to now a partner of a first responder. And I recognized in that moment that they, well, it says a lot about the relationship I'm no longer in. They need a lot of help. They need a lot of support. They struggle with a lot of things. I was very front row to seeing that. And also, I worked in a psych hospital in that time when I was in grad school. And so I was in this psych ward where they would send first responders in the general public, which is insane for me now, and they are in this room with someone that's actively psychotic, and they might be in there because they are struggling with substance use, and they're trying to detox. So when I saw that happen, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, there needs to be more specialized care, and there needs to be that, it's very much so needed. And then the other side was being the partner of the first responder. I remember feeling like I wanted community, but I didn't fit into the community. When I would go on the Facebook groups, it was like a lot of burnt out wives who just wanted to complain about it. And that felt so icky to me. And then the other side of it was like these really like thirsty, badge bunnies, right? That was not me either. I felt like, well, I have my own identity, but I also felt like I wanted some community because the culture is so immersive. You're in it, and people outside of it don't usually understand it. So those experiences got me thinking, why I'm really interested, in this line of work. So I did my EMDR training for trauma. I knew I wanted to work with trauma. I've always liked that high trauma thing, and being in the psych ward really excited me, which sounds crazy, but I loved working with that high intensity, um, I guess, treatment. And then I went and I did my first responder counselor certification. And then I worked underneath a first responder therapist until I got licensed. And then from there, created an Instagram page, recorded podcasts, and that's how I've become well known. And I've had about 6 years of experience working with first responders. So that long story, but that's where I'm at now.
No, that's awesome. And I'm glad that you talked about how they put first responders kind of in a general public area because that still happens today. We're seeing a lot more specialized treatment centers that are popping up, but they're very expensive, right? And while some facilities or some fire departments or police departments may send these providers to those specialized units, not everybody has access to that. And if you don't have access to that, guess where you're going? If you make an attempt or if your alcohol has become an issue or any other type of substance has become an issue, you're very likely going to be put into a public space. And that can be hard because what if you're sitting in this public space and now you're seeing people that you pick up all the time, all these people that you pick up and that you treat, and now you're sitting in the same space as they are. I can't imagine that that feels too good.
No, and then not having specialized care of someone understanding what you've been through, why you're struggling with substance use, right? I mean, if you're treated like the general population, you're not going to get the treatment that you need.
Yeah, that's a hard one until we get more specialized facilities and make it more financially feasible for the people that need that. That's a tough one.
Anybody listening to, if I have pretty good connections with quite a few different resources that take insurance for detox centers. I'm on a few referral lists and work with a couple of their clients when they come in. And another good one is Runestone Ranch. I don't know if you have connected with them.
Mm-mm.
They are out in Livermore area and they just created a ranch. Well, they've had the ranch, and what they're doing is they're building these cabins as a retreat for first responders to go up there on the weekend and basically just like eat really good food straight from their garden. They have horses, like equine therapy. I think they're going to do like yoga, hikes. They have a shooting range. Like it's basically just kind of a getaway. So that's different than a treatment center, but it's kind of a, if you're feeling burnt out, this would be a good resource. And then I also have treatment centers. I'm thinking of the other one I work with. After Action is the treatment center I work with often. That one is, I believe, out of Los Angeles, if I remember correctly. And they specifically are first responder center, and they take tons of different insurances. So those are always options. And I'm also happy to be a resource for anybody that has questions that's listening.
That's fantastic. And you talked a little bit about like couple therapy, right? Especially coming from your experience with dating a firefighter and how kind of difficult that was because it is a huge community. And if you don't fit into that community, it can be difficult to continue being in that community. So that is one of the treatments that you actually enjoy doing, right? Is couple therapy. How does that fit in with everything? How important is that for you and for those couples?
Yeah, I love couples therapy. We'll backtrack a little bit. When I was underneath my supervisor, I created a group specifically for the spouses of first responders or the girlfriends, any first responder. And those really did really well. I did those for about 3 years straight, where I would do them back to back, maybe 10-week courses. I don't do them anymore, but I created an online course for first responder partners so that they would be able to navigate these things by watching the videos. And I touch on topics, intimacy, communication, what to do if your first responder is struggling. There's so much in there. I think it's like, I don't even know how many hours of videos you can either listen or watch. So that's one piece of it. Couples therapy, I love. And the reason why I love couples therapy is because I'm getting the whole picture. When I sit with just the first responder, just the spouse, I get a piece of the picture and I, take what they're saying. What they bring in is what I believe. And that's why what you said earlier is so true. What you put into therapy is what you're going to get out. So if you're honest and you bring as much of the picture in as you can, then you're going to get a lot out of it. If you come in and try to tweak the picture and make it look like, you're the victim and you're not going to get a lot out of therapy because I'm going to treat you the way of what you're bringing in. So couples therapy, there's no room for that. because usually they're calling each other out.
Yeah.
I see the whole picture in front of me, and it's extremely important when I would say not just for when you're struggling and having issues. I think everyone thinks that's when you go to couples therapy is like, oh, infidelity issues, we need to go to couples therapy, or, we haven't been intimate in over a year, let's go to couples therapy. When I hear that, yes, I'm happy you're here, but I wish you would have came earlier when you were feeling disconnected and you were having lots of little arguments and you were feeling like the communication wasn't being it wasn't working, you weren't feeling heard, you weren't feeling understood. That's when couples therapy should be utilized.
That sounds like when there's a communication breakdown is kind of when that should be started
Yeah, that's
specifically.
Yeah, that's a big reason. I think most of the clients that I'm working with and have worked with have all boiled down to how they talk to one another, and feeling heard and understood. I mean, those are very basic parts of being a human in relationships. We want to be heard and we need to feel understood. And if either of those are lacking, then it's really a struggle. And then if you add your own childhood trauma on top of that, let's say you had a dad that never heard you growing up, then you get in a relationship and your spouse is not, you feel like they're not hearing you, that's going to be a huge issue for you because it's bringing up childhood trauma that maybe hasn't been worked on. So I also see that often. It's not typically just on the surface, it's usually ties back to somewhere else.
That's awesome. And do you think that there is a huge communication issue with first responders in general because they kind of start to break down when they've had issues at work, whether it's seeing something really bad or just some type of internal trauma that they're dealing with from work?
Yeah, sometimes I have seen that. I think sometimes first responders, or I would say that they are taught, and this is a good skill, compartmentalization. So being able to compartmentalize, that is an amazing skill. I like to picture a cabinet. Sometimes I picture like the Narnia the big wardrobe.
Yeah.
Every first responder has one. And it's important that you have one. You have to go into your job with a cabinet. And what that cabinet does is it serves the purpose of your own feelings, your own emotions, your own personal stuff. When you get on scene and you see someone, you have to be able to act as the first responder, not as you with your emotions, right? That is where you get in trouble in the job when you personalize the things you see. That's where PTSD pops in. Now, I'm not saying don't be a human, but in that moment, you have to do A plus B equals C. So, what do? You take your personal feelings of, ooh, that kind of looks like my grandma, or that reminds me of my kid, and you shove it in the cabinet. Nothing wrong with that. That's a beautiful thing. The problem is they teach you how to shove things in the cabinet. They don't teach you how to take it out. So I see these people who are coming to me and they've got these wardrobes with the freaking doors popping off and things falling out, and they bring it to me and they're like, I don't know what's wrong, but I feel like I just like can't sleep or I can't concentrate and I'm irritated all the time. And I say, well, okay, let's have a look at that cabinet. Whoa, have you ever cleaned the shelves in here? It's a disaster. Typically, no. So with what you're asking, yes, I think that I see a lot of the times is that we're not cleaning out the cabinet, and that is becoming a communication issue because when they go home, they use that same skill with their relationships where they're like, oh, we had a fight, but I'm going to put it in the cabinet. So nothing's getting resolved or worked on because it's always getting sent to the cabinet.
Well, that's it's so true. It's so true. We see it every day. So at what point in a first responder's career do you think that they should obtain a therapist?
Ooh, okay. So different for everybody. And I will say this, therapy is not for everybody. And I know that's some people are diehard, like, yeah, everyone needs therapy in their life. I don't think therapy is for everybody. I don't think everybody needs therapy. But I will say, as a first responder, you are the one person who is going to be seeing trauma day in and day out, and there's no exceptions to that. Like that's what your reality is. So as a human, if we go back to being a human, that's not normal. Our brain is not supposed to see trauma day in and day out. It's difficult. And yes, we become desensitized and used to the job, and it's some parts are exciting, absolutely. Um, but I think as a first responder, the beginning of the career is when you come in and make sure that you have your coping skills down, that you know how to decompress, that you know how to take your crap out of the cabinet. If you don't know how to do those things, then that's when you come to therapy. Um, And again, I see it all the time. Guys come in or women come in after they're on the way out when they're retiring and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm unwell. The rate of suicide is so high right now, especially for those who are going into retirement because they no longer have their identity. If they would have came to therapy way sooner in their career, and I can't tell you exactly where, but before all of this popped up or when they started to realize that things were sitting funky with them, then it would have been a lot easier. But now that if they show up now, it's not a bad thing. It's going to take a lot of work and it's going to be hard work.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We are seeing a lot of increased suicide rates amongst the people that are retiring out of all first responder positions, firefighter, EMT, you know, police officer, anybody that's been doing this for 20 plus years, often going into almost 25 or 30 years, you
Yeah,
know.
you want to hear something really nerdy?
Hmm.
I'm reading a book right now about brain scans. Dr. Amen is the guy who wrote the book. He's pretty popular on like TikTok and Instagram, which is how I found him. But I'm reading his book about brain scans. He's a psychiatrist, and he said, it's really interesting that as a psychiatrist, we are the one doctor that does not look at the part of the body that we treat. You go to an ear, nose, and throat specialist. What do? They look at your ear, nose, and throat. You go to a psychiatrist. What do? They listen to you talk about your symptoms and then they give you medication. How does that make sense? Why are we not looking at the part of the body we're treating? So he does these brain scans, and I'm reading this book about what trauma looks like in the brain, and it's insane, insane. It talks about like people who really struggle with impulse control or addiction or mood disorders, and how 90% of the time, maybe even more than that, it comes back to a trauma in the brain. So when I think of first responders, they're taking in trauma all the time. It's altering your brain when you take in trauma. And that's insane to think about. So, I
That is
mean, take,
insane.
yeah,
Do you know the name of the book?
yeah, I have it on my kitchen table. What is it? You know what? I can pull up in 2 seconds. I think it's Train Your Brain. Let me see. It is Change Your Brain, Change Your Life by Dr. Daniel Amen, Amen.
Amen. Okay.
It's a great book. It's not clunky, like super sciencey funky. He talks a lot about like the stories that he's seen, really interesting ones of people who have like a tumor in their brain, but they come in because they're feeling violent and they, want to cut their roommate for no reason when they get pissed off. And they look at the brain and they're like, oh, you have a tumor that's sitting on this part of your brain that causes impulse control issues. So obviously, these are very extensive examples, but the book is very, very interesting. I'm enjoying reading it.
Sounds interesting. I'm gonna be getting that one and checking it out.
Cool.
So we talked about discussing some addiction. I want to get to that here in just a minute, but I do want to talk a little bit about how you talked very positively about your job, which is great. We all should feel positive in our careers, right? And if we're at a point where we're not very positive and therapy is not helping us get back to that position, it might be a time to consider changing careers. Has there ever been a time for you where you almost got out of it, where you're like, this is just too much to handle. I can't do this anymore. I need to step back.
Yeah, no, I've never had a moment like that, thank God. And I think the reason why I haven't had a moment like that is because I know my limits, number one, because I am a master at self-care, a freak about it, if you will. If anybody who follows my Instagram story is just what I do day in and day out. I have a sauna in my house, I have a cold plunge in my house. I get in those regularly. The cold plunge I get in often because it keeps me sane. I see you shaking your head. Do you hate
Nope.
it?
I'm not even willing to try it.
No way, you have to.
No.
I know it's not for everybody, but there's so much research behind just how it resets the nervous system and the dopamine levels. I'm a strong, strong believer in first responders using that as a tool. But anyways, I digress. I have had moments in my career where I'm like, dang, I need a vacation. I think that's pretty normal. I've had moments where I felt a bit burnt out. And what I do is instead of pushing myself forward and going, well, this is what you signed up for, this is your job, which I think first responders often do as well, is I stop and go, okay, what do I need to tweak here? Do I need to work less hours? I work for myself, so I have that liberty and I feel very privileged to be able to do that. Do I need a vacation? And I take them. I took a week off last month and I went camping with my family at the beach. And that is my favorite thing. This past weekend, I was feeling a little bit drained. I had a lot of heavy sessions, which is part of my job, and I love what I do. But I was freaking tired at the end. And sometimes at the end of my day, I don't want to talk to people. I have a very small social bubble because my social battery is very tiny. I talk to people all day long and I love that. But at the end of the day, sometimes I just need to sit in silence. So this past weekend, I decided that I needed to just unplug from social media. And that did wonders for me. I came back on Monday and I was ready to go again. So listening to myself and being in tune with where my limits are and then making adjustments as needed, taking vacations, maybe sleeping in an extra hour and not pushing myself by going to the gym before work. Those are the tools that I use to not get to the point where I'm like, hey, I don't want to do my job anymore. I love my job. I feel very fortunate to have the job that I have, but I have to take care of myself or I am going to end up burnt out.
What would you recommend to people who don't necessarily, like you said, first responders, like we do a lot of the time just have to push through because of our work schedules, right? Like I can tell you on at the last job that I worked, my work schedule was 2 days on, 2 days off, 5 days on, 5 days off. And those were only 12-hour shifts, but even at only 12-hour shifts, you're exhausted by the end of the day. Those 2 days off, you're like just trying to kind of recoup and get back to it. And then you're on for 5 days and then you're off for 5 days. What do you suggest to people who have just chaotic schedules like that, who might not necessarily have the time to take off an entire week or even a couple of days? Like, I know we push a lot in it's the little wins that we can do. So, what are some of the things that people can do when they get off shift or maybe when they have that 24-hour time off to make themselves feel better and kind of reset for the next shift?
Love that. Yes. So I see some first responders who have the 1 day on, 1 day off, 1 day on, 1 day off schedule, and I hate it with a passion. Um, because there's no time to decompress fully.
No.
So I talk about this a lot with my clients. So you come from work and you have to defrost. And when you're defrosting, it takes a while. It usually takes a whole day. I think for most first responders, it takes 24 hours to fully defrost and relax and no longer be a first responder, but be a husband or a wife or a mom or a dad, right? Whatever you are. Then that day before work, you are working on like getting back up to that spot of hypervigilance again so you can do your job. So it really cuts your days down. Absolutely. And I think most of my clients have some kind of shift work schedule like this, and it's difficult. So what you said, and I love that, and I agree with it, is you have to find the small things that fill your cup. Sometimes it's literally just taking a few really big deep breaths. I know it sounds so stupid, but I make my clients do it all the time and they roll their eyes at me, but I say, okay, I need you to pause for a second, take a really big deep breath through your nose and a big exhale out of your mouth, dropping your shoulders. And I'll ask them, when's the last time you did that? And they'll go, I don't know. Okay, so something as little as that is great. It helps you decompress throughout the day. The other thing is planning and scheduling your days off to make sure that it actually fills your cup. So, alongside finding the small things that work, you have to be able to plan what your day off is going to look like. And it has to be something that fills your cup. So, when we think about self care, and I hate this, but sometimes we think like it has to be these big, extravagant vacations, or even for women first responders, they're like, oh, it needs to be something girly, or I have to go get a pedicure or get a massage. No, that is not everybody's self-care. It might be someone's self-care, sure, but that's not everybody's self-care. Sometimes self-care is watching your favorite show snuggled up on the couch with your favorite, dinner, with your dog next to you and maybe your spouse or your best friend or your family. Sometimes self-care is getting enough sleep on your days off. Sometimes it's cleaning up your house and, doing the project that you've been wanting to do. It's going to be different for everybody, and it doesn't have to be super time consuming. So finding the things that you can do during work, taking those deep breaths, checking in with the people outside of work. And then when you're home, being able to fully disconnect by doing those things, working out, any of those, cold plunging, taking care of yourself, whatever feels good for you, you have to plan it in. Because if you don't, then it's going to feel like you wasted that day off, and then your cup is not going to be filled up when you go back to work again.
Yeah, I'm a huge I'm really bad about that because I have ADHD. So I sit down and I have this plan to start something and then I don't do anything because it's overwhelming because I have so much to do. So I totally get that. Making plans is kind of the best way to go about it.
Yeah, decision fatigue is difficult. What I tell my clients who have decision fatigue is, or they get overwhelmed and just don't do anything, is I like to split the day in half or split the day. So if you are at liberty of 5 days off, which is lovely, then you have one day to decompress and one day to ramp up. Okay, so that kind of cuts it down a little bit. Now you want to split them either in half or split them day 1 day and 1 day. Do your wants and then do your needs. So your wants might be just laying on the couch, coloring in a coloring book, watching your favorite movie, taking a workout class, walking your dog, whatever. Your needs might be going grocery shopping, doing laundry. If you can split them up, it kind of helps you to prioritize. And then it also helps you to kind of nail down what day you're doing what. So it's not this big, what could I do? I could clean my house, but I could also sit down. But I feel like I need to be productive, but I also need to rest. I think it takes that out of the equation when you're able to like stick it on a certain day. And you could do half day too. You could do half, morning until 12 o'clock, I'm going to do my needs. And then 12 o'clock to the evening, I'm going to do my wants.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome suggestion. I need to be better about it. So one of the things that I've noticed is in the last few years through Facebook or social media or whatever, I'm seeing a lot of people who I worked with for very long periods of time that are coming up and saying that they are now announcing that they've been sober for 10 days or 15 days or 30 days, saying that they've had addiction issues for like years. People that I've worked with, and I had no idea that they had addiction problems. This is something that is huge in our field. Very, very huge. And it's crazy how much people can hide it for as long as they can hide it. What do you suggest for people who have problems with addiction that are looking for help?
So, I mean, everyone's heard this, but denial is such a big part of addiction, of not even recognizing. And I think where it stems from, oftentimes, not all times, but a lot of times, it's this you work really hard as a first responder. Like you said, these shifts are not for the weak. They're long hours. Sometimes they're exhausting. Most times they are. You're working sometimes with dummies. I mean, right? Like you don't get to choose how your shift is going to look. Unfortunately, you get what you get. So because of that, there's this almost like binge mentality that pops up where because I work hard, I deserve to relax hard. And the quickest way for people to relax is by using a substance. It's the cheater way out. Let me grab a drink. Let me, whatever that looks like. Um, that is it. The reason we do it is because it works. It's effective. It helps you to get out of your first responder hat faster than the whole day that typically it takes. Right. The problem with it is it is extremely addicting. It is a habit forming thing. So every time you get off your shift, if you think, oh, I worked hard, I deserve to rest hard, and you go on a, bender and you drink, a 12 pack one night or 6 pack in one night, neither of that's okay. I see this a lot with my seasonal folks, like more wildland. But I think that all first responders have that mentality to some degree, but more so when they've been on for like 31 days or, whatever, and they come like, I'm gonna relax so hard that I just like black out and drink the whole time. Um, Obviously, health issues, affects your brain and go back to brain scans. High levels of drinking or using substance absolutely affect your brain and they can permanently damage your brain, can cause dementia prematurely. It's insane what it does to our brains. So that's one part of it. And then the other part is you become functioning in it because it becomes a routine and then you have a tolerance, right? So it's really easy to hide those things. So I would say with addiction, it's one of the trickiest things. You can never force someone to get sober until they are ready to do that. And it comes with waking up and recognizing, like, hey, I'm sick of my shit. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, this is not serving me. Until you get to that point, you will continue to repeat those patterns. And it's scary. But once you do get to that point and you reach out for help, you have the ability to change your whole entire life after that.
I agree with that. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, I think that people in general, right? We're in a culture right now where if you want something, you get something right away, right? Like that's just Amazon overnight delivery kind of stuff. You know what I mean? And we see that that doesn't work in medicine, but it doesn't mean that we correlate that. And I think that it's hard for people to understand that when you do have an addiction, that you also have to work to get better, right? It's not going to be you go in and you're fixed overnight. It's going to take time. It's going to take therapy, right? Because you have to change that process. And one of the things that you'd mentioned in the form that we had talked about too was negative thinking patterns. And I think that kind of makes or breaks our whole day, whether addiction is involved with it or not. I think we see a lot of first responders that have a lot of negative thinking patterns. And I will tell you that I was guilty of that when I was burnt out. I did have a lot of negative thinking, and I work on that on myself constantly on a daily basis to not be so negative and to think more positively about the job that I'm doing and the things that I'm doing outside of work. And do you see that as a big issue in your sessions, is negative thinking?
Yes. So I think as humans, we are predisposed to be negative thinkers. I think it's very easy to get into that point. As first responders, it's a second layer. Absolutely. I see this all the time. And I always, well, obviously hold space, listen to the complaints, listen to the problems. We're going to work on them. But I like to ask, well, what's going well? What are you enjoying about your job? Like, are there pieces you like? And they will really struggle to find it. And with people who are doing the work and they have been doing the work for a while, if I ask that question, they'll come back with, well, even though I'm not really enjoying this work, I do enjoy seeing this one coworker, or I do enjoy my lunch break. Or even though I'm not enjoying my work, I am looking forward to my days off where I get to be with my family. Like that is important. Hope, right? Everybody needs to have some level of hope. That is what is contributing to the high levels of suicide rates, is because people are not having hope. They have nothing to look forward to. They are not enjoying any aspect and they get stuck in this negative headspace. Our thoughts are so powerful. They are so powerful. We have one thought here, and you know what it does? It 100% connects to how we feel, and then it connects to how we behave. So when we have these negative thought patterns, what happens is they create these grooves in our brain. So I have some clients do this. This is they always roll their eyes at me because it's annoying. But what I'll have them do, and you can picture it, is I have them pull out a piece of paper and I ask them to fold that piece of paper into the smallest square that they can that would fit in a pocket. So they sit there and they fold the paper, looking at me like, what the heck is this? And they hold it up. And I say, okay, great. Now unfold the paper. They usually like deadpan stare at me and then they unfold the paper. And I say, okay, cool, fold it again. They fold it again, unfold it, fold it again, unfold it. Usually at this point, they're like, what the heck is this? I'm never coming back to therapy. Now, the reason I do this and then I explain is our brain creates grooves, and the fancy word for them is neural pathways. And when we have certain thoughts, if we have that same thought over and over and over and over, it creates a crease in our brain. And you'll notice when you're folding the paper that if you fold that paper a few times in the same exact lines, it's going to be really easy. It's going to take seconds to fold it back in. Those become automatic thought patterns. So the more you think positive, the more automatic it becomes, and that is your go-to. And it's harder to think positive because you have these really deep grooves in your brain. So if you're always thinking, I hate my job, I'm miserable, no one likes me, over and over and over, or you grew up in a childhood where you were told those things, and then as an adult, you tell yourself these things, you have these neural pathways and these grooves in your brain that are so deeply embedded that we actually have to do some deeper work around your brain. And that's where EMDR therapy comes in, where we actually rewire the brain. And you probably heard this, that I feel like that term is thrown around a lot, but EMDR rewires the brain and creates new neural pathways. It's a lot of work, but once you get there and you rewire the brain and you recognize that you need to do that work, it's amazing, life-changing work.
And I know that I don't know a whole lot. EMDR can be medicated or non-medicated. Is that correct?
No. So I think you're thinking of ketamine therapy.
Ketamine, yes.
What do you mean by medicated and non-medicated?
Yes, like ketamine or like they use the mushrooms sometimes or any other type of substances to kind of help facilitate. changing that thought process.
Right. So I think people often put EMDR in that category, but it's not. It's exposure therapy. I don't know too much about ketamine therapy, unfortunately, where I don't know if people use EMDR with ketamine or if they just use normal talk therapy with ketamine. I think ketamine is so powerful that it probably doesn't even need EMDR. It just needs talk therapy because you're out of it. But I would say from my experience, 90% of EMDR is non-medicated.
Okay.
So you show up to session and you get, if you're in person, you get buzzers in your hand and they vibrate back and forth. They're just like kind of little like buzzy, doesn't hurt. If you're on Zoom, then what I do with my clients is I have them tap. So one hand on each shoulder and they're tapping back and forth. This is called bilateral stimulation. It activates the left and the right side of our brain at the same time. It also helps us to recall memories that we've either tucked into, the deep parts of our brain that we don't think about daily. And it calms our nervous system. So when I talk about using the left and the right side of the brain, we have a side of our brain that uses logic and a side of our brain that uses emotion. And some people are more left or right sided, depending on their personality, their background, if they're left or right handed. That also is a big part of it. And when we do EMDR, we want to use the logic and the emotion. So then what I have my clients do is I have them close their eyes and I have them go back to the traumatic instance or the thing that we're focusing on and have them go back to it in their brain. So you're going back and you're re-exposing yourself, which is the hard part of EMDR. And that's why it's so scary for some people because they're like, that was so gnarly. Why would I want to go back and think about it again? But what I'm doing is I'm desensitizing you to it. So your brain is no longer scared of it, which hypes it up and makes it this big anxiety thing. We're desensitizing you. And then the other part of it is we're breaking down the pieces and we're connecting them. So here's another picture. EMDR, this is a disgusting picture. I wish I had a better one. It is literally a plunger. It goes down, it plunges the crap, and it brings it up to the surface. Also, why people don't like to do it because it does its job. Another picture is EMDR as a shovel. It goes in and it scoops everything off the bottom and brings it up. Now, if we're going to scoop everything off the bottom, we're typically not just scooping that one instance. We're going to scoop everything that may or may not be related to it. So that childhood trauma that you had, if we are experiencing trauma in your everyday life today, most of the time, if not always, it goes back to something else. We have these core beliefs about ourselves. And those are the parts of our brain that have to be rewired. And by rewiring them, we go back and we do like inner child work. We, heal those parts of yourself, the parts that we, left in those very traumatic spaces. We go back and we rescue them. That is what EMDR looks like in a nutshell. And then I guess if I could tell you one more thing about it, and I'm sorry, I'm nerding out on you.
No, it's okay.
The last thing is that the goal of EMDR obviously is I can't wipe your memory. I would be so rich if I could. Unfortunately, I cannot. So we can't make things just disappear. But what we can do, and the goal of EMDR is to take any like negative, icky feelings that you have that are correlated to it, that we just cut them off. And so what it should look like if it's done well is at the end, you're able to do that thing or think about that thing and not have any feelings about it. It's kind of a neutral, like, okay. One more, I guess, example for me, practically, I've done EMDR for myself. I had a fear of flying, and I did a lot of EMDR before I had to go on a big trip this past year. And I was just terrified of it. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to be able to fly without medicating myself. I'm so unwell. And I did a bunch of EMDR, and the goal was for me to get on the airplane and feel calm. Oh my gosh, got on the airplane, didn't needed no medication, got up, walked around on the airplane, ate snacks, like the most relaxed I've ever felt. And I was like, what the heck is this voodoo? EMDR is amazing. I've done it around other parts of my life, but that's just a more, I guess, like straightforward example of EMDR. In my work with EMDR with my own therapist, I had to go into that airplane over and over, and I had to sit with the uncomfortable, terrifying feelings that I had of being trapped and out of control, and what if I get sick, and all these different fears that I had around flying. I sat with them in EMDR and I desensitized myself to them, and then I rewired my brain and recognized, hey, that lack of control is actually linked to a couple other things in my childhood. Wow, that's interesting, right? Healed those parts of myself, then was able to get on an airplane and be totally fine. So
That's awesome. Had you flown previously?
I have. And what's funny is oh gosh, I lived in New Zealand for a good while and I've flown to Australia. So I've done this in my past, but it had been so long and I've had a couple like anxious, I guess, experience with it more recently that kind of created this big fear bubble of, oh my gosh, I think I'm not going to be okay if I get on an airplane again. And like I said, the stuff that was unhealed that was popping up from my past, the feeling of being trapped and being out of control, those went back to things that had nothing to do with flying,
That's so crazy.
isn't it? Yeah.
So, for people who don't feel comfortable with doing EMDR, are there other techniques that you could use to help them get through?
Yes. EMDR is not for everybody. Some people hate it, and that's fine. It's not fun. I mean, no one, I don't think I've ever gotten out of my own sessions with EMDR and been like, woohoo, let's do it again. Can't wait for next week. It's not for the weak. It is difficult work. But also EMDR, it's obviously it's very efficient and it's effective and it's a quick way to do the deeper work, but you don't have to do that either. It's just a tool in a toolbox. So as a therapist, my job is to always communicate with my clients and ask them, hey, how's this feel? Are you comfortable with this? This is what this looks like. This is what it would feel like. Do you want to try it? Oh, you didn't like it? Let's not do it again. Let's talk through it instead. There's other kinds of exposure therapy. There's so many tools in that basket. So it's just one tool. It's just one that I like to use because I, number one, respect people's time, and I also respect their finances. And I know therapy's not cheap. So if we're gonna do the work, then we might as well do the work. I don't want to dilly dally around it.
Yeah, isn't it crazy how, like, I know for some insurances, mental health, anything is free, but how some other insurances, like, don't even cover it. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it is crazy. And you'll find good therapy and bad therapy everywhere. Um, Kaiser's really funky with their insurance, where they only want to give you therapy if you're literally ready to jump off something. And like they're like, "Oh, cool, you're going to jump off something. Let me give you 2 sessions a month." Insane.
Yeah.
There's always other like loop arounds a super bill. If people don't know about that, is a great way. Kaiser doesn't take them because they suck, but I have strong feelings towards Kaiser, sorry. But other insurances, Blue Cross Blue Shield, all the other mainstream ones, a lot of them will take a super bill, and it'll depend on your plan. But what it is, it's you're basically asking the insurance company to reimburse you for your out of pocket expenses. So it sometimes depends on your deductible. You have to call the insurance company and ask if you can do a super bill. But when they work, that's so nice because you get that money right back after you pay it. So it's almost like they are paying for your therapy. It's just kind of a little bit delayed.
That's really cool. And you said it's called a super bill?
Yeah.
So you just call your insurance and you say, hey, look, I'm going for mental health. Will you guys reimburse me for this?
Yeah. If I give you a super bill, can you reimburse me? Another way is just to submit one and find out, but it takes a little bit longer. And for those who don't want to sit on the phone with their insurance company, I don't blame you. But for those who have a little bit extra time and patience, you can call and ask. Yeah. And then for myself, I work with a couple of nonprofits, and those nonprofits will fund first responders to see me. So they almost act as a private insurance, which is really amazing. The Overwatch Collective is one. And then Next Rung is another one that I work with, and they both will take it case by case, but any first responder who can't afford therapy can inquire through me or through them and get help without having to pay the full fee of a therapy session. And then the last thing I have to say about that is if you're buying Starbucks every single day but you can't afford therapy, I think it's time to reevaluate where your money's going. Obviously, that help is there for people who need it, but I see it abused a lot because people don't respect therapy or they don't want to. I see people who will like take the funding in the beginning, which is great, and it gets them into therapy. But then when the funding runs out, they're like, oh, shoot, yeah, I'll pay for this because this works and it's good. So sometimes people need to figure that out for themselves, which is fine. But also, some people need to rearrange their finances to be able to take care of themselves. And that's a huge thing I see all the time.
Yeah, unfortunately. But fortunately at the same time, right? Because it is still a stigma. No matter what, I think it's going to be a stigma for a long time amongst first responders and everybody else about mental health being really a necessity, like really part of what we need on an almost daily basis. Um, Not necessarily seeing a therapist on a daily basis, but really taking that time to, like you said, self-care every day, right? Make sure that you're present every day to tackle those feelings and those emotions that you're dealing with on a constant basis after seeing trauma almost on a
Yeah.
daily basis.
Mhm.
That's really
Yeah.
cool. What would you say is like one of the proudest things that you've ever done in your whole life?
Wow. That's the question. My whole life, you mean in my career or just in
No,
general?
in general.
Oh, wow. I think there's a lot that I feel proud of in my life. I mean, starting a private practice, I felt very proud of myself. Most people go under and work underneath someone else as soon as they graduate, or get fully licensed. I jumped right out and cannonballed into private practice, and I feel really fortunate and blessed that my practice does as well as it does. And it started that way. It was never slow. It dove right in. I feel very proud of myself for doing that hard work. And then I think the other part is I feel honored. I don't know if this is proud of myself, but I feel very honored to be trusted by first responders in this community and to be someone that has I guess, is known for being trusted and understanding and a good therapist. To me, that makes me feel proud, but it also makes me feel very humbled and honored that I can be trusted by these people who don't trust very many.
Yeah, and I want to say thank you because I know how hard it is to find a first responder therapist and not just a first responder therapist, but to find a good or even great first responder therapist because a lot of us, like I said, we play with this. Well, if I go in, I'm going to break the therapist, right? Like that's just a huge joke and basically an excuse not to go see a therapist. But when we can find that person that we can talk to, it makes a huge difference. So thank you for being that person and for being that voice for first responders. Because, like you said, you've talked on over 20 podcasts now sharing these experiences, and that's fantastic. We need more of this exposure and we need to be able to find more of our people to help us dump what we need to get off our chests. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So Destiny, I just wanted to give you a few minutes to kind of talk about anything that you feel that we didn't talk about or bring up anything important or shout anybody out that you want to shout out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple just loose ends there. I do also specialize in work with people who struggle with sexual addiction. That goes hand in hand with substance use. Unfortunately, I see this often with first responders. And I think there's a lot of shame behind that. I work primarily with men, and I work primarily with men who hate therapy and don't want to talk about their feelings. So if you fall in that category, or if you're a woman that falls in that category, just know that this is a place where you can come. You can DM me, ask me questions. I'm never here to judge. I sit with those details day in and day out. I sit with people who are actively, working through infidelity issues. I'm sitting with people who are struggling with pornography issues, people who are struggling, with dysfunction sexually. All of that is in my wheelhouse as well. And I don't think it's talked about a lot because it feels icky to say out loud and to hear sometimes. But if anyone needed a sign that they need to go to therapy and they're struggling with one of those things, this is the place. And I also offer phone call sessions for those people who do have some shame and there is stigma around it, where they don't want to sit down with me and face to face talk about that. But I would also encourage that, if you're going to get help and you're going to do the work, know that it's a safe place if you do sit down face to face. Confidentiality is huge. And then the last thing that I wanted to share, I think that's important, is that if you are struggling and you come to therapy, you're not going to be hospitalized for saying that you want to kill yourself. I just think that's very important for first responders to know. I think that's part of the stigma is they don't want to come and then it be reported back to work or they get their, gun taken away. And I talk about this in the very first session and we repeat it if we need to, but the only thing that would ever cause me to go, ooh, we need to do something is if you came to session and you said, hey, Destiny, I'm feeling suicidal, I'm having the thoughts, and I have a weapon at home and I'm going to use it later. If you had a family member or a close friend that came to you and said, hey, I'm going to shoot myself later, would you be like, okay, cool, see you next week? No, you would need to find them help and support, right? So that would be the only reason we would have to outsource, and it wouldn't be to your work. And if you're a police officer listening, it wouldn't be, us calling your department that you work for. It would be us having a very long conversation together, like hours of conversation. You wouldn't be stuck with me in that session. You wouldn't be leaving. And we would be talking about what those resources look like. What can we do? Can we get you into a treatment center? I mean, that would be great. First responder treatment center. Let's look at your insurance. Let me make the calls for you. Let's make them together. I'm not going to send you into a generalized public place that you're going to get thrown in with everybody else. So I just want anyone listening to know that for me specifically, I can't speak for all therapists, but that is not something that I think anyone should be afraid of. If you're having suicidal thoughts, that is a very human thing. I think as humans, we think about that and it comes up, and you should be able to talk about it without fearing that you're going to get in trouble or you're going to get told on. My job as a therapist is never to tell on someone or cover my own butt for liability reasons. My job as a therapist is to care for my clients, and when they need help, it's to hop in and help and sit with them in it, not tell on them or, get them what they need and step away. My job is to sit next to you with my arm around you and to help you, navigate all that together. So long-winded, but those are the two other things that pop up in my head that I think are important for people to hear.
No, I think that's really good because in a field where when it's really kind of shitty, but when we get called out for somebody who's suicidal, if they've made a threat to a friend or family, a lot of the times those have to get transported. It doesn't matter in what context it was said. If it was just we're arguing and I'm saying I'm going to go jump off a bridge, like you have just bought yourself probably a 3-day stay in the hospital. So it's good to know that if we're having these feelings and if we're having these emotions, we can go to you and express these feelings and not feel like I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to get pulled from my job because they're going to think I'm weak, right? That it's good. That's a really good way to put it. And I'm glad that you expressed that.
Yeah.
That's hard for people.
No grippy sock vacations unless you really need one.
Yeah, grippy sock vacations. That's a great, I'm going to make that the title.
Great.
That's fantastic. Awesome. Well, Destiny, is there anything else you want to say before we jump off for the day?
No, anyone can reach out to me though if they have any questions, even if you're not in California. I'm happy to connect anyone listening with a therapist that's culturally competent in their state.
And where can they get a hold of you?
So my Instagram is on_being_resilient. I check my DMs often. I have a website that has more background information and a picture of my dog, and all the podcasts that I've been on are on there as well. It's my first and last name, DestinyMorrisTherapy.com.
Perfect. And I'll hyperlink all of that in the announcement stuff. And if you don't have anything else, then I think we'll jump off, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us on the 911 Nonsense podcast today.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you're enjoying the show and want to show your support, be sure to check out the Noon merch store on Bonfire. Find the link in the description below. Also, if you have any guest suggestions or if you're interested in being a guest on Noon yourself, visit the website at www.samspursuit.com to get in touch.